My dear friends, let me tell you about a woman who thought she'd seen the worst that life could throw at her. Colonel Margaret Maggie Lawson had survived 35 years in the Marines, served in places most of us only see on the evening news, and buried a husband who gave everything for his country. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for what was waiting when she finally came home to Texas. Picture this. It's a sweltering August afternoon in 2023, and Maggie's sitting in Terminal B at San Diego International, clutching her boarding pass to Austin. At 62, she's still got that military bearing. Shoulders straight, eyes alert, but there's something softer about her now. Maybe it's the civilian clothes, or maybe it's the silver bracelet she keeps touching, the one her husband David gave her before his final deployment to Iraq 20 years ago. You know, folks, military retirement isn't like other retirements. When you spent your whole adult life serving your country, suddenly finding yourself without a mission can feel like floating in space without a tether. But Maggie had a mission now, reconnecting with her daughter Claire, the nurse she'd raised to be strong and independent while juggling deployments and duty stations across the globe. As that Southwest Airlines flight lifted off over the Pacific, Maggie pressed her face to the window and watched California shrink below. She was thinking about Claire's last email, sent 3 weeks ago. "Mom, can't wait for you to see the house. Austin's been good to me." Simple words, but they meant everything to a mother who'd missed too many birthdays, too many Christmas mornings, all in service to something bigger than herself. The flight attendant, a cheerful woman about Claire's age, noticed Maggie's Marine Corps pin and thanked her for her service. "My pleasure," Maggie replied, the way she always did, but her mind was already in Texas, already planning the conversation she'd been rehearsing for months. How do you rebuild a relationship with your only child when duty has kept you apart for so long? How do you make up for all those years when your country needed you more than your family did? Military families know the struggle intimately. We sacrifice together, serve together, and somehow we find ways to love across the distance. At least, that's what Maggie told herself as the plane began its descent into Austin Bergstrom. The Texas Hill Country stretched out below, all green and gold in the late afternoon sun. And for the first time in decades, Margaret Lawson allowed herself to dream about a quiet future. Little did she know that quiet was the last thing waiting for her in Austin. Little did she know that her greatest battle, not as a Marine, but as a mother, was about to begin. Because sometimes, my friends, the people who hurt us most are the ones we never see coming, the ones who smile while they're sharpening the knife. The rental car GPS led Maggie through Austin's winding neighborhoods, past food trucks and live music venues, until she reached Zilker area, where Claire had bought her little craftsman house 2 years ago. But as Maggie pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. The lawn that Claire always kept so neat was overgrown, newspapers were scattered on the porch, and that cheerful yellow mailbox was overflowing with what looked like bills. Claire's always been so particular about her yard, Maggie muttered to herself, grabbing her duffel bag from the trunk. 20 years in the Marines had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that something was terribly wrong. She knocked on the front door. No answer. Tried calling Claire's phone. Straight to voicemail. The message she'd heard a dozen times. "Hi, you've reached Claire Lawson, RN. If this is a medical emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Claire's voice sounded tired even in the recording, something Maggie hadn't noticed before. "Excuse me, ma'am," came a voice from across the street. An elderly gentleman was approaching, walking a small terrier. "You wouldn't happen to be Claire's mother, would you? She showed me your picture once." Mr. Peterson, as he introduced himself, had been Claire's neighbor for 5 years, a retired teacher. He'd always looked out for the young nurse who worked such long shifts at the hospital. But the words that came next hit Maggie like a physical blow. "Oh, honey," he said, his face crumbling with sympathy. "You don't know, do you? Claire's been in the ICU at St. David's for 2 weeks now. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. That husband of hers. Well, I haven't seen Ryan around much lately." The world tilted sideways. Stage 4. ICU. 2 weeks. The words echoed in Maggie's head as she steadied herself against the porch railing. How had she not known? Why hadn't anyone called her? I just flew in from California," she managed to say. "I had no idea she was sick." Mr. Peterson's expression grew even more concerned. "Ma'am, forgive me for saying this, but that Ryan fellow has been acting mighty strange. Claire was always so proud, never wanted to worry you with her problems. But these past few months, I'd see her struggling to get the groceries in from the car, losing weight, and whenever I'd offer to help, she'd just say Ryan was handling everything." Military training kicked in. Gather intel. Assess the situation. Take action. Maggie pulled out her phone and called St. David's Medical Center. After being transferred 3 times and proving her identity, a tired-sounding nurse confirmed what she already knew in her heart. Claire Lawson was indeed in the ICU, and yes, she could come visit immediately. As she drove through Austin traffic toward the hospital, Maggie's mind raced through the implications. Terminal illness support was something she dealt with as a military officer. Soldiers facing the unthinkable. Families torn apart by loss. But this was her daughter. Her Claire, who used to patch up her scraped knees and dream of becoming a nurse, so she could help people the way military doctors had helped her daddy before the war took him away. The hospital parking garage smelled of concrete and disinfectant. Maggie sat in her rental car for a full 5 minutes, staring at the entrance to the medical center. Through the windows, she could see people coming and going, some relieved, some devastated, all carrying the weight of someone else's pain. In all her years of military service, facing down enemy fire and making life-or-death decisions, she never felt as unprepared as she did at this moment. But Margaret Lawson hadn't become a colonel by backing down from hard fights. She locked the car, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward whatever was waiting for her on the 5th floor of St. David's ICU. What she found that would change everything she thought she knew about her daughter's life, and set in motion a chain of events that would test every ounce of strength she'd built over 35 years of military service. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and hushed conversations. Maggie followed the nurse down a sterile hallway, her military-issued boots silent on the polished floors. Room 517, the number that would be burned into her memory forever. Nothing could have prepared her for what she saw when she pushed open that door. Claire, her vibrant 35-year-old daughter, who used to run 5 Burmese chots on weekends and dance in her kitchen while making Sunday dinner, was barely recognizable. The cancer had taken so much. Her color, her energy, even that mischievous smile that reminded Maggie so much of David. "Mom!" Claire's voice was barely a whisper, but her eyes lit up when she saw Maggie. "You came." "Of course I came, baby girl." Maggie pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed, fighting back tears that 35 years of military discipline couldn't contain. "Why didn't you tell me you were sick?" Claire's laugh was weak but genuine. "Because you'd have left everything and rushed down here to take care of me, just like you always do. You just retired, Mom. You deserve some peace." But as they talked, Maggie began piecing together a picture that made her blood boil. Claire had been fighting this battle alone for months. The first symptoms had started around Christmas: bloating, fatigue, pain she dismissed as work stress. By the time the diagnosis came in March, the cancer had already spread. "Where's Ryan?" Maggie asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. She'd met her son-in-law only a handful of times over the years, usually at quick visits between deployments. He'd seemed charming enough, successful in the commercial real estate business, but something about him had always rubbed her the wrong way. Maybe it was the way he dominated conversations, or how he seemed more interested in talking about his deals than asking about Claire's work. Claire's face closed off. He's been having a hard time with all this. The doctors say I might have weeks, maybe a month or 2 if the new treatment works. Ryan needed some space to process. While his wife was dying alone in a hospital room. Maggie had to bite her tongue to keep from saying what she really thought about a man who abandons his spouse during terminal illness. Instead, she took Claire's hand, so thin now, with an foreport that made her wince every time she moved. "Tell me about the house," Maggie said, changing the subject. "Mr. Peterson seems like a nice neighbor." "Oh, he is. He's been so kind, bringing in my mail, watering the plants when I was too tired. I don't know what I would have done without him these past few months." Claire paused, and something flickered across her face. Worry, maybe fear. Mom, there's something I need to tell you about the house. About our finances. Before she could continue, the door opened and Ryan walked in. Maggie's first thought was that he looked remarkably well for someone whose wife was dying. Tan, well-dressed, carrying what appeared to be shopping bags from some expensive boutique. His surprise at seeing Maggie was genuine, but what struck her was that it took him several seconds to even acknowledge Claire. Margaret was surprised. Nobody told me you were coming to town. His voice had that practiced smoothness that reminded Maggie of the politicians she dealt with in Washington. All surface charm with something calculating underneath. My daughter is in the ICU, Ryan. Where else would I be? The conversation that followed was stilted, full of Ryan's explanations about business trips, important clients, the stress of dealing with Claire's illness. But Maggie noticed things. How he avoided looking directly at Claire. How he checked his phone constantly. How he seemed more concerned with managing Maggie's impression than with his wife's comfort. When he left an hour later, claiming another business appointment, Claire finally broke down. The tears she'd been holding back for weeks came flooding out, and in that moment, she wasn't a brave nurse facing her own mortality. She was just a scared woman who felt abandoned by the person who'd promised to love her in sickness and in health. "Mom, I think he's waiting for me to die," she whispered. So quietly Maggie had to lean in to hear her. The insurance money, the house, I think he's already planning his life without me. Over the next few days, as Maggie split her time between the hospital and trying to understand Claire's situation, a horrifying picture began to emerge. Military families understand financial responsibility. They have to, with deployments and uncertain schedules. But what Maggie discovered about Ryan's handling of their finances was beyond irresponsible. It was predatory. Claire had been the primary breadwinner. Her nursing salary, combined with modest investments and the small life insurance payout from David's death that Maggie had given to her as a nest egg, had provided a comfortable middle-class life. Ryan's real estate business, as it turned out, was more aspiration than reality. Most of his deals fell through, and the few that succeeded barely covered his expensive tastes. "Mom, I need to show you something," Claire said during one of their quiet afternoon visits. The new chemotherapy was making her nauseated, but she seemed determined to have this conversation. "I've been keeping track of things. I knew you'd want to see the paperwork when you got here." From her purse, always organized, just like the daughter Maggie had raised, Claire pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything's on here. Bank statements, loan documents, the mortgage papers Ryan had me sign last month. I was so sick, I could barely hold a pen, but he said it was just a refinancing to get better rates." That evening, in Claire's empty house, Maggie plugged in a USB drive and began to understand the scope of Ryan's betrayal. The refinancing wasn't for better rates. It was a cash-out mortgage that had stripped nearly all the equity from the home. Over the past 6 months, while Claire was getting sicker and more dependent on him, Ryan had systematically drained their joint accounts. $50,000 in March, $75,000 in May, another $100,000 in July, just weeks before Claire's condition became critical. The bank statement showed ATM withdrawals in Las Vegas, charges at high-end casinos, expensive restaurants, and hotels. While his wife was fighting for her life, Ryan was living it up in Sin City. But it was the audio files that made Maggie's blood run cold. Claire had recorded several phone conversations, partly because her chemo brain made it hard to remember important details, and partly Maggie suspected because some part of her already knew what Ryan was doing. In one recording, dated just 2 weeks ago, Ryan was talking to someone named Marcus. "Listen, the doctors say it's a matter of weeks now. Maybe a month if she's lucky. I've already moved most of the liquid assets to the offshore account we set up. Once she's gone, I'll cash in the life insurance and start fresh in Miami." This whole Texas thing was getting old anyway. Maggie had to replay the recording 3 times before the full meaning sank in. Ryan wasn't just waiting for Claire to die. He was planning to profit from it. He'd systematically stolen her money, mortgaged her home, and was now counting down the days until he could collect on her life insurance and disappear. The rage that filled her was unlike anything she'd experienced, even in combat. This was an enemy fire or the chaos of battle. This was cold, calculated cruelty aimed at the person she loved most in the world. Her daughter, who dedicated her life to helping others, was being financially murdered by the man who'd sworn to protect her. But Margaret Lawson hadn't survived 35 years in the Marines by letting her emotions override her tactical thinking. If Ryan thought he could steal from a military family and walk away clean, he was about to learn what happened when you underestimated a colonel who'd fought in 3 different theaters of war. The next morning, she made 2 phone calls. The first was to Anthony Delgado, a former JAG attorney who now practiced civilian law in Austin and specialized in financial fraud cases. The second was to Detective Sarah Monroe at the Austin Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Both had experience dealing with cases where vulnerable people were exploited by those closest to them, stories that were becoming tragically common as financial predators targeted military families, elderly widows, and anyone facing terminal illness. "Ma'am," Detective Monroe said when they met at the police station, "I have to tell you, these cases are some of the hardest we handle. The emotional manipulation, the legal complications when spouses are involved, the difficulty of proving intent. But if what you're telling me is accurate, we might have enough to build a case." Legal justice stories often take time to unfold, but Maggie was running out of time. Claire was getting weaker every day, and Ryan was getting bolder. Just that morning, he'd mentioned to Claire that he was thinking about taking a much-needed vacation to Florida to look at some investment properties. The timing wasn't coincidental. Time was the enemy now. Claire's condition was deteriorating rapidly, and Ryan was already making moves to finalize his theft. But Maggie had 2 things that most people in similar situations didn't: military training in logistics and planning, and a network of professionals who understood how to fight predators who targeted vulnerable families. Anthony Delgado's law office was in a converted house near downtown Austin, the kind of place that felt more like someone's living room than a sterile corporate environment. When Maggie spread out the evidence Claire had compiled, his expression grew grimmer with each document. "Mrs. Lawson, in 30 years of practicing law, I've seen a lot of financial abuse cases. Elderly people scammed by their own children, military wives taken advantage of during deployments, families destroyed by addiction or gambling problems. But this," he tapped the stack of bank statements, "this is systematic theft disguised as marriage." The legal strategy was complex. Since Claire and Ryan were married, many of the transactions were technically legal. A spouse has a right to access joint accounts and make financial decisions. But the pattern of behavior, combined with Claire's medical condition and the recorded conversations, paint a picture of financial exploitation that might be criminal. "The challenge," Delgado explained, "is that we need to prove Ryan was acting against Claire's interests while she was mentally incapacitated by her illness. But your daughter was a registered nurse right up until she was hospitalized. Legally, she was competent to make financial decisions. That's where Detective Monroe's expertise became crucial. Financial crimes against vulnerable adults often required creative investigation techniques. While Ryan had been careful to make his transactions look legitimate on paper, he'd been sloppy about covering his digital tracks. "The Las Vegas connection is our strongest lead," Monroe explained during a meeting at the police station. "Nevada has strict reporting requirements for large cash transactions, and several casinos where your son-in-law was gambling have cooperated with similar investigations. We've already requested his transaction records from 3 different establishments." Meanwhile, Maggie was learning to navigate a healthcare system that she'd never had to deal with as a military family. TRICARE and military hospitals were straightforward. Civilian insurance and complex billing systems were like learning a foreign language. But as she worked with Claire's medical team, she discovered another piece of Ryan's scheme. Claire's oncologist, Dr. Patricia Reeves, was a straight-talking woman who'd been treating cancer patients for 20 years. When Maggie asked about Claire's prognosis and treatment options, the doctor's response was telling. "Your daughter's been asking about discontinuing treatment," Dr. Reeves said. "Not because she's ready to give up, but because she's worried about the financial burden on her husband. The experimental treatment we discussed could extend her life significantly, but it's expensive and not fully covered by insurance." She mentioned that Ryan was concerned about the cost. The pattern became clear. Ryan had been pressuring Claire to refuse expensive treatments while simultaneously draining their accounts. He wasn't just stealing her money. He was potentially shortening her life to maximize his inheritance. This revelation gave Delgado and Monroe the legal framework they needed. Financial exploitation of a terminally ill person, especially when it affected their medical decisions, crossed the line from civil wrongdoing into potential criminal behavior. But building a case and getting Ryan arrested were two different things. Texas law required clear evidence of criminal intent, and Ryan had been careful to maintain plausible deniability. Every transaction could be explained as legitimate business expenses or necessary financial management. The recorded conversations were damaging, but might not be admissible in court without proper chain of custody documentation. That's when Maggie made a decision that would have made her Marine Corps instructors proud. She was going to give Ryan enough rope to hang himself. Working with Detective Monroe, they devised a plan that would require Ryan to expose his true intentions in a way that couldn't be explained away. The plan was risky and required perfect timing. Claire's condition meant they might only have one chance to catch Ryan in an actionable crime. But military operations always involved risk, and Maggie had learned long ago that sometimes the most dangerous course of action is doing nothing at all. The plan was elegantly simple, the kind of operation that looked easy on paper but required nerves of steel to execute. Detective Monroe would approach Ryan with what appeared to be routine questions about Claire's finances, standard procedure when investigating potential insurance fraud. Meanwhile, Maggie would be in the hospital room with Claire, and Delgado would be monitoring everything from his office. Ryan took the bait exactly as they'd hoped. When Monroe showed up at his office asking about the large bank withdrawals and mentioning that insurance companies often investigate claims involving significant financial changes before a policyholder's death, Ryan went into full defensive mode. "Look, Detective, my wife is dying," he said, his voice taking on that practiced tone of grieving husband. "I've been under incredible stress, trying to manage her medical bills and keep my business afloat. Sometimes I need to access our savings for legitimate expenses." "Of course, Mr. Carter. These are just routine questions. Though I have to ask, $300,000 in 6 months is quite a lot of medical expenses. Can you provide documentation for where this money went?" That's when Ryan made his first mistake. Instead of producing receipts or medical bills, he became aggressive. "Are you accusing me of something? Because if you are, I want my lawyer present. I've done nothing wrong except try to take care of my wife while dealing with business, pressures you couldn't possibly understand." Monroe, who'd been investigating financial crimes for 15 years, recognized the deflection tactics immediately. Innocent people didn't lawyer up when asked routine questions about documented transactions. They provided explanations, showed receipts, and cooperated with investigations that could clear their names. But Ryan's second mistake was bigger. As Monroe was leaving his office, Ryan called Marcus, the same person from the recorded conversation Claire had captured weeks earlier. What Ryan didn't know was that Monroe had obtained a warrant to monitor his phone calls based on the evidence Maggie had provided. "That cop was just here asking about the money," Ryan said, his voice tight with stress. "I think Claire might have said something before she got too sick to think straight. We need to accelerate the timeline. How quickly can you get the Miami setup finalized?" Marcus, it turned out, was a financial advisor who specialized in helping wealthy clients hide assets from taxes, divorce proceedings, and creditors. The Miami setup was a shell company that would allow Ryan to disappear with Claire's money once she died and the insurance paid out. "Ryan, if there's a police investigation, you need to be very careful," Marcus replied. "Don't make any more large transfers until this blows over. And for God's sake, stop gambling in Vegas until your wife is gone and this is all settled." The recorded conversation was exactly what Monroe needed. It established criminal intent, conspiracy to commit fraud, and provided evidence of ongoing criminal activity. But more importantly for Maggie, it confirmed what she'd known in her gut. Ryan was actively planning to profit from her daughter's death. That evening, Maggie sat beside Claire's hospital bed as her daughter drifted in and out of sleep. The new chemotherapy wasn't working, and the doctors had quietly suggested it might be time to consider hospice care. But there was something Claire needed to know before they moved to comfort care only. "Sweetheart," Maggie said gently when Claire's eyes opened, "there's something I need to tell you about Ryan. About the money." What followed was one of the hardest conversations of Maggie's life. Explaining to a dying woman that her husband had been systematically stealing from her, planning to abandon her, and actually hoping for her death required a delicate balance of truth and compassion. But Claire's response surprised her. Instead of shock or heartbreak, Claire nodded slowly and squeezed Maggie's hand. "I know, Mom. I've known for weeks. Maybe longer." Her voice was weak but steady. "I kept hoping I was wrong, that the medication was making me paranoid. But when he started talking about me stopping treatment to save money, while I could see the shopping bags from his Las Vegas trips, I knew." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was scared. And because I thought maybe if I died quickly enough, he'd at least let you have some of Dad's things, maybe the house. I didn't realize he'd mortgaged everything." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have been stronger. I should have protected what Dad left us." "Baby girl, you have nothing to apologize for. Nothing. You trusted someone you loved, and he betrayed that trust. That's on him, not on you." Claire was quiet for a long moment, then turned to look directly at her mother. "What do we do now?" "Now," Maggie said, her voice carrying 35 years of military authority. "We make sure Ryan Carter learns that stealing from a Marine family comes with consequences he never imagined." The trap was set with the precision of a military operation. Detective Monroe had enough evidence for an arrest warrant, but she wanted to catch Ryan in the act of finalizing his financial escape plan. Anthony Delgado had filed emergency motions to freeze the joint accounts and prevent Ryan from accessing Claire's life insurance policy. And Maggie had convinced Claire to make one final recording that would serve as the smoking gun they needed. Claire's acting ability surprised everyone. When Ryan visited the hospital 2 days later, she played the role of the resigned, dying wife perfectly. Weak and seemingly confused from medication, she asked Ryan to help her understand their finances. "Honey, I'm so worried about leaving you with debt," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The medical bills, the mortgage, I want to make sure everything's taken care of before I—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Ryan's performance was equally convincing, at least on the surface. He held her hand, spoke in soothing tones, and assured her that everything was handled. But when Claire asked specific questions about their savings account, his answers revealed the scope of his deception. "Don't worry about the money, sweetheart. I've moved most of our savings into investment accounts that will be protected from medical debt. Once we're through this difficult time, everything will be secure. What about the house? I refinanced it to get cash for your treatments. The payments are manageable, and it gives us flexibility for whatever medical expenses come up." It was all lies delivered with the smooth confidence of someone who'd been practicing deception for months. But the recording device taped under Claire's hospital table captured every word, including what happened after Claire pretended to fall asleep. Ryan's phone call to Marcus, made right there in the hospital room while his wife lay dying 3 feet away, was the final piece of evidence Detective Monroe needed. "She's asking about the money," Ryan whispered into his phone. "I think she's more aware than the doctors realize, but it doesn't matter now. The doctors say maybe a week, 2 at most. Have you got the Miami accounts ready?" "All set. The insurance money should clear within 30 days of the death certificate. Then you're free and clear to start over." "Good. I'm tired of playing the grieving husband. This whole Texas thing was a mistake from the beginning." The arrest happened the next morning in Ryan's office, with Detective Monroe and 2 uniformed officers executing the warrant while he was on a conference call with potential investors. The charges were extensive: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, conspiracy, and theft of assets exceeding $100,000. But it was a look on Ryan's face when he saw Maggie standing beside Detective Monroe that made the arrest truly satisfying. For the first time since she'd met him, Ryan Carter looked genuinely shocked. He'd underestimated the quiet military mother, assuming she was just an old woman who would grieve her daughter and accept whatever story he told her. "You did this," he said, his voice filled with the rage of someone whose carefully laid plans had just crumbled. "That money was rightfully mine. I took care of Claire. I supported her career. I deserve—" "You deserve exactly what you're getting," Maggie interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded respect in war zones around the world. A cell in a trial where everyone will learn what kind of man abandons his dying wife to gamble away her money in Las Vegas. The legal proceedings move quickly by civilian standards, though not fast enough for Claire's deteriorating condition. Delgado's emergency motions had successfully frozen Ryan's assets and secured Claire's life insurance policy. But the emotional toll of the betrayal was accelerating her physical decline. "Mom," Claire said during one of their quiet evenings together in the hospital, "I need to tell you what I want to happen with the money, with everything." What Claire had in mind was a legacy that would turn her tragedy into something meaningful. Instead of letting Ryan's betrayal define her final days, she wanted to create something that would help other families avoid similar situations and support the causes she'd cared about throughout her career. "I've been thinking about those nursing students I used to mentor," she said. "The ones who couldn't afford school, who had to work 2 jobs just to pay for textbooks. And about families like ours. Military families where one parent is deployed and the other has to handle everything alone. What if we could help them?" As Ryan sat in Travis County Jail awaiting trial, Claire and Maggie began planning something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Despite the pain medication and her weakening condition, Claire threw herself into designing what would become the Colonel Lawson Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting nursing education and providing financial literacy resources for military families and vulnerable adults. The foundation's mission was deeply personal. Claire had experienced firsthand how financial predators target people who are isolated, sick, or overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. Military families, she knew, were particularly vulnerable during deployments, medical crises, and transitions. Widow support was practically non-existent in many communities, leaving women like she might have been, like Maggie had been after David's death, easy targets for financial exploitation. "We can't prevent every case of financial fraud," Claire explained to Anthony Delgado during one of their planning sessions in her hospital room. "But we can educate people about the warning signs, provide resources when families are in crisis, and create support networks so nobody has to face these challenges alone." The foundation would offer several programs: need-based scholarships for nursing students, financial counseling for military families facing deployment or medical emergencies, legal assistance for elder abuse and financial exploitation cases, and a support network for families dealing with terminal illness. It was ambitious, but Claire's determination was contagious. Dr. Reeves, Claire's oncologist, was moved by the foundation plans. "In 20 years of treating cancer patients, I've seen too many families destroyed not by the disease itself, but by the financial and emotional stress that comes with it. What you're proposing could save marriages, keep families together, and prevent the kind of predatory behavior your husband exhibited." The medical team agreed to extend Claire's life as much as possible through palliative care, giving her time to see the foundation launch properly. It was a race against time, but Claire had inherited her mother's stubborn determination to complete the mission. Meanwhile, Ryan's legal situation was deteriorating as rapidly as Claire's medical condition. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, bank records, testimony from the Las Vegas casinos where he gambled away Claire's money, and documentation of his shell company in Florida designed to hide stolen assets. Marcus, his financial advisor, had been arrested as well and was cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony revealed that Ryan had been planning the scheme for over a year, even before Claire's cancer diagnosis. He'd actually taken out additional life insurance policies on Claire, without her knowledge, betting that her high-stress nursing job and family history of heart disease would eventually pay off. "It's one of the coldest cases I've ever prosecuted," District Attorney Jennifer Walsh told Maggie during a victim impact interview. "Ryan Carter didn't just steal from your daughter. He literally hoped for her death while pretending to love her. That level of calculated cruelty is rare even in financial fraud cases." But Maggie wasn't interested in revenge. She was focused on legacy. Working with Delgado and a team of nonprofit lawyers, they established the Colonel Lawson Foundation with the recovered money and assets from Ryan's failed scheme. The house, once it was freed from the fraudulent mortgage, would be sold to fund the foundation's initial operations. Claire's life insurance money would create the endowment that would make the foundation sustainable for decades. As word spread about Claire's situation in the foundation, donations began coming in from unexpected sources. Nurses from across Texas sent small contributions. Military families shared their own stories of financial exploitation and offered support. Even some of the casino employees from Las Vegas, who'd witnessed Ryan's callous behavior firsthand, sent money with notes expressing their disgust at what he'd done. "You know what amazes me?" Claire said during one of her increasingly rare moments of clarity. "Ryan thought he could destroy our family and walk away rich. Instead, he's created something that's going to help thousands of families for generations. It's like divine justice." The foundation's first scholarship recipient was selected while Claire was still alive to meet her. Emma Rodriguez was a 22-year-old single mother working as a nursing assistant while trying to complete her RN degree. Her story, struggling to balance school, work, and raising a toddler alone, reminded Claire of her own journey through nursing school while Maggie was deployed overseas. "Miss Claire," Emma said during their video call, tears streaming down her face, "I can't believe you're doing this. I was about to drop out because I couldn't afford next semester's tuition. This scholarship isn't just helping me. It's going to change my son's entire future." That conversation, Maggie later said, was the moment she knew Claire's legacy was secure. Not the money recovered from Ryan, not the legal justice of his conviction, but the knowledge that one person's betrayal had been transformed into hope for countless others. Claire passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in October, with Maggie holding her hand in Texas sunlight streaming through the hospital window. Her last words were simple. "Don't let him take everything, Mom. Keep the foundation strong." Ryan Carter was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The judge, noting the particularly cruel nature of his crimes, said during sentencing, "Mr. Carter, you didn't just steal money. You stole time, dignity, and peace of mind from a dying woman. Your actions represent a level of betrayal that strikes at the heart of what marriage and family should mean." But this story doesn't end with Ryan's conviction, or even with Claire's peaceful passing. Sometimes, my dear friends, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we think the book is closing. 2 weeks after Claire's funeral, Maggie was sorting through her daughter's belongings when she found a letter addressed to her, dated just days before Claire died. Inside was a photograph of a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile, along with Claire's final request. "Mom," the letter read, "I want you to meet Emily Rose Martinez. She's 10 years old and has been in foster care since she was 6. I met her last year when she was a patient on my ward. Appendicitis that turned complicated because she'd been hiding the pain, scared of being a burden to her foster family. She's smart as a whip, loves to read, and reminds me so much of myself at that age. She needs someone who understands what it means to be strong, someone who can show her that family isn't just about blood. I think you two might need each other." Emily Rose was living in a group home in East Austin when Maggie first visited her. The social worker, Linda Chun, had been working with foster families for 12 years and had seen her share of heartbreak, but she'd never encountered a situation quite like this one. "Mrs. Lawson," Linda explained as they walked toward the common room where Emily was doing homework, "I have to be honest, Emily's been through 3 foster families in 4 years. She's not difficult, but she's protective of herself. She's learned that adults sometimes leave, and she's built walls to protect her heart." When Maggie entered that room and saw Emily hunched over a math workbook, her gray hair in neat braids and her school uniform carefully maintained despite being secondhand, something clicked into place. This wasn't about filling an empty space left by Claire's death. This was about recognizing that sometimes families are built rather than born. "Are you Miss Claire's mom?" Emily asked, looking up with eyes that seemed far too old for a 10-year-old face. "She talked about you sometimes when I was in the hospital. She said you were a soldier and that you were brave." "I was a Marine," Maggie corrected gently, settling into the small chair beside Emily's desk. "And your Miss Claire was the brave one. She told me about a very special young lady who was braver than any soldier she'd ever met. The adoption process took 6 months. Texas stories often move at their own pace, but by spring of 2024, Emily Rose Martinez officially became Emily Rose Lawson. The ceremony at the Travis County Courthouse was small but meaningful, attended by Anthony Delgado, Detective Monroe, Dr. Reeves, and Mr. Peterson, who become like a grandfather figure to both of them. Military retirement, it turned out, was perfect preparation for raising a 10-year-old who'd learned to be self-sufficient out of necessity. Maggie understood structure, routine, and the importance of keeping promises. Emily understood that sometimes people had to leave for work or duty, but that didn't mean they stopped loving you. The Claire Lawson Foundation grew rapidly in its first year. The nursing scholarships helped dozens of students complete their education, while the financial literacy program for military families prevented several cases of exploitation similar to what Ryan had done. The foundation support group for widow support became a model replicated in other states, providing both practical resources and emotional connection for women navigating loss alone. But perhaps the most meaningful program was one that Emily suggested during one of their evening conversations on the porch of their new house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in Cedar Park that felt nothing like the show place Claire had shared with Ryan, and everything like a real home. Mom Maggie, Emily said she'd started calling her that within a month of the adoption. What if the foundation helped other kids like me? Kids whose grown-ups got sick and couldn't take care of them anymore, or whose families fell apart because of money problems. And so the Children's Crisis Support Program was born, providing emergency financial assistance and temporary care coordination for families facing terminal illness, military deployment complications, or financial fraud situations. It was Claire's legacy expanding to protect the most vulnerable members of military families and communities across Texas. By the Foundation's second anniversary, Maggie and Emily had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as if they'd been together for decades. Emily excelled in school, made friends easily, and showed signs of inheriting both Claire's compassion and Maggie's determination. She volunteered at the Foundation's events, helping distribute information packets and talking with other children who'd faced family crises. "Do you think Miss Claire will be proud of what we're doing?" Emily asked one evening as they worked together in their small garden, planting tomatoes and herbs for the summer. Maggie paused, her hands still muddy from transplanting seedlings, and looked at this remarkable child who brought such unexpected joy to her life. The question deserved a thoughtful answer. "Emily, I think Claire is amazed by what we built together. The Foundation is helping hundreds of families. You're thriving in school and making friends, and we've proven that the worst thing someone can do to a family, try to destroy for money, can actually make that family stronger and more determined to help others." Plus, Emily added with the practical wisdom that constantly surprised Maggie. Mr. Ryan is in jail where he can't hurt any other families, and we get to live in this nice house with Mr. Peterson next door bringing us cookies every Sunday. It was true. The house they bought with part of Claire's recovered money was just 3 streets over from where Claire had lived, close enough that Mr. Peterson could continue his role as honorary grandfather. The elderly teacher had become an essential part of their chosen family, helping with Emily's homework, teaching her to play chess, and sharing stories about the neighborhood's history. On quiet Sunday evenings, the 3 of them would sit on the front porch watching Texas sunsets, paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Emily would read aloud from whatever book had captured her imagination that week, while Mr. Peterson and Maggie shared coffee and planned the week ahead. These moments, peaceful, ordinary, filled with the comfortable silence of people who genuinely care for each other, were everything Claire had hoped for when she wrote that final letter. Family betrayal stories usually end with broken relationships and lasting damage. But sometimes when people refuse to let betrayal define them, those stories transform into something completely different. Stories about resilience, chosen family, and the way love multiplies when it's shared generously. The Claire Lawson Foundation continues to grow, now serving military families across 6 states and expanding into additional programs every year. Emily, now 12, has announced her intention to become either a nurse like Miss Claire or a lawyer like Mr. Delgado, so I can help families that get hurt by bad people. And Maggie? Military retirement turned out to be nothing like she'd expected. Instead of a quiet fade into civilian life, she found her most important mission yet, proving that family isn't defined by blood or legal documents, but by the daily choice to show up, care for each other, and build something meaningful together. Sometimes, late at night when Emily is asleep and the house is quiet, Maggie sits in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and thinks about that day in San Diego when she boarded the plane to Austin. She thought she was flying home to reconnect with her daughter and enjoy a peaceful retirement. Instead, She'd walked into betrayal, loss, and heartbreak that would have destroyed many families. But she'd also discovered that the strongest foundations are often built on the sites of the worst destruction. Rye and Carter had tried to steal everything from their family: money, dignity, peace, and time. Instead, his betrayal had created a legacy that would help thousands of families for generations to come, brought together a grandmother and granddaughter who needed each other desperately, and proved that love shared widely always defeats greed hoarded selfishly. As I close this story, my dear friends, I'm reminded that our worst moments often contain the seeds of our greatest triumphs. Claire Lawson's marriage was destroyed by financial fraud, but her legacy is helping prevent the same tragedy for countless others. Maggie lost her daughter to cancer, but gained a granddaughter who needed exactly the kind of steady love that military families understand. And Emily, who'd learned not to trust adults who made promises, found 2 women and an honorary grandfather who showed her that some people keep their word no matter what. The Claire Lawson Foundation is still operating today, still growing, still turning one family's tragedy into hope for thousands of others. If you know a military family facing financial difficulties, a nursing student struggling to afford school, or anyone dealing with elder abuse or financial exploitation, remember Claire's story. Sometimes the help we need is just a phone call away, provided by people who understand that the best response to betrayal is building something beautiful from the pieces left behind. That's the real victory, folks. Not revenge against those who hurt us, but the determination to make sure their cruelty becomes a foundation for something so good, so lasting, that it transforms even the worst betrayal into an unexpected blessing. Claire Lawson would be proud of what her foundation has become. But I think she'd be even more proud of the family that grew from her final act of love, connecting a lonely grandmother with a little girl who needed someone to believe in her, proving once again that the most powerful force in the universe is love that refuses to be defeated by hatred. And that, my friends, is how a story that began with betrayal became a story about family, hope, and the unbreakable bond that form when people choose to care for each other no matter what life throws their way. Here's a meaningful conclusion with life lessons and your call to action. Friends, Margaret and Claire's story teaches us profound truths about resilience in our golden years. First, trust your instincts. When something feels wrong in your family's finances, investigate immediately. Too many seniors fall victim to financial predators because they ignore those nagging doubts. Second, document everything. Claire's meticulous record-keeping saved her family's legacy. Keep copies of important financial documents, and don't hesitate to ask questions when someone else manages your money, even if it's your spouse. Most importantly, betrayal doesn't have to define your legacy. When life delivers its cruelest blows, we have a choice: become bitter or become better. Margaret chose to transform her daughter's tragedy into a foundation that helps thousands of families. She turned her grief into purpose, her loss into lasting impact. For those facing similar challenges, whether it's caring for aging parents, dealing with family financial disputes, or navigating military retirement, remember that you're stronger than you know. Seek help from professionals, lean on your community, and never underestimate the power of turning your pain into someone else's healing. Sometimes our greatest victories come not from avoiding life storms, but from how we rebuild after they pass. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.